Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of CouchCon on Heroes Without Limits. I'm Miranda, and I am moderating or running this panel on portraying disabilities in, excuse me, in TTRPGs. I use she/her pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at @mdebenham1. I've been kind of playing D&D for about a decade now, and DMing for maybe 4 or 5 years. And I kind of mostly play D&D 5th edition and some Dark Heresy and Savage World settings. So that's me. I'll hand us over to Jazz.
Hi, I'm Jazz. I'm gender fluid, so I tend to use they, them pronouns on the internet. You can find me at VultureJazz on Twitter, and I'm not currently in any streaming games.
Oh, I forgot to plug Mousecapades. I also play in Mousecapades, which is run by the wonderful Jo. Jo, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, why not? My name is Jo. I go by they, them pronouns. You can find me at Sleepless Seymour on Twitter with only 2 S's in the middle. The cat in charge anywhere else. I do Mousecapades every other Friday with Miranda here. Next episode is on April 17th, so come check it out. Yeah, I cosplay, I write. I am hard of hearing. I'm autistic and I have EDS. So sometimes I have bad auditory processing. It's all good.
Oh, Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike, he, him pronouns. You can find me at Silent Chariot on Twitch and Twitter. You can find me streaming at Mustang Arts during Curse of Strahd campaign. I was born with spina bifida, so I've been in a wheelchair all of my life. And I have some things I've gone with the spina bifida, like hydrocephalus and scoliosis.
Oh, thank you. And Faye?
Hey, my name is Faye. I have she, her pronouns. It's like Faye, but it's like Faye, but with a TH. And I've been playing tabletop RPGs since about 2006. And I've played Dungeons and Dragons every edition except for 5th, Vampire the Masquerade Live, Pathfinder, and GURPS. For me, the system never really mattered, just the story, but your mileage may vary. My disabilities are complex PTSD due to various traumas. And I have self-diagnosed as general anxiety disorder. And I was diagnosed with chronic depression, but I think it's more maybe situational. And that's me. You can find me at They and Twilight on Twitter and Twitch.
Oh, thanks everyone. So I guess I just wanted us to kind of get started by talking about the general representation issue with disabilities in tabletop. So have any of you ever seen disabled characters played, or NPCs even, if you're GMing? Have you played them yourselves? What have you seen?
Go on this one. That's okay. So
Yeah.
I do a game. I DM a whole lot, but I also have a player in a game with Mustang's art, and Mustangs and I are very similar in the sense that we love putting disabled NPCs in our games just because they're there. Like there's never like a reason, as if like there needs to be. It's just because disabled people exist, and so like why not have them in your games as well? And yeah, it's always a very like casual sort of thing. It's never like integral to the plot or whatever. It's just like they exist, so like we treat them as such. I tend to always have characters, both NPCs and personal characters that I play, either be hard of hearing or no sign language, just because it's a part of like myself that I can put into a character. And I always think that we need more sign language in games anyway. There's not really like a mechanic for that. That's
Totally. That's cool. Yeah, I tend to personally not play disabled characters, so my disability is like mobility difficulties, and when I was a teenager I used a wheelchair. And I've never really had a good way of putting that into a game, especially since I've never had a disabled GM before Jo. So it's kind of a hard conversation to have, I think, to try and get people to understand how you could play a disabled character and it not be a major drama for the party or whatever. I don't know what the rest of you think.
So, I played Malkavian a while back with OCD, which is one of my co-occurring disorders along with autism. And it wasn't a great experience because it worsened my own OCD.
Yeah. I guess you have to strike like a careful balance with protecting yourself as well.
I will say I personally haven't played or seen as much representation, except for maybe the stereotypical, I guess, like Geralt from Rivia, grizzled veteran with a limp, essentially.
Yes.
The only the things I've gone into in tabletop role-playing games, I guess specifically one of the major ones people might know is Call of Cthulhu, like the fall into madness trope.
Yeah.
Like the tabletop there, so. Which is not how it works in real life, so unfortunately, it's a lot harder than that.
Prevalent in Curse of Strahd as well.
Yes, I think it's in all of them, honestly. But go ahead, sorry, I'm talking over you.
It's okay. Curse of Strahd is the first module 5e D&D that I saw that had like an actual chart of like madness effects, and it wasn't just like a homebrew rule that you could throw in. It was actually like supposed to be part of the game. And some of them were like kind of alright, and then some of them were like, that's not very appropriate.
Yeah.
To throw in there. And also the term madness in general is always one that just seems a little bit too like negative, I guess.
Yeah. I think like the worst ones for me are the ones that are like, this person has gone mad and is therefore violent to people they know. And that's the conclusion. And you're like, this isn't a healthy representation of mental health difficulties or trauma.
It's really hurtful, actually. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think it can be hard to have a conversation with the DM, especially if you're playing in a casual setting, like something like an Adventurers League game, or like somewhere where you're not good friends with the other players or the DM, to have that conversation and be like, hey, can we not do that?
Mind if I go? Critical Role's had some great disability representation, like Shakaste, and I can't remember the name of the amputee goblin. I think it was like Brow or something. It was a strange name. But he's done some great NPCs that have been not, look at this disabled person, aren't they a liability and funny?
Yeah.
Like fish mouths tend to be a problem in Vampire the Masquerade.
What do? Sorry?
Fish mouths, it's the I'm gonna be Harley Quinnish crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was in a 3-shot where I was an artificer who was in a wheelchair, which was a pretty fun character to play. That was kind of my first time ever being a character with a disability like myself. So yeah, I quite enjoyed it. I'm not used to playing characters who are that much like myself. So it was but something I'm glad I did.
Yeah, that's really cool. I guess that leads me on to what I was gonna get your opinions on next, which is like, how do you have any advice for people on building disabled characters? Either like things they should think about before they do that, or mechanics that you know about that are good. I know Mike has a resource you were talking about earlier before we started streaming. I think for me, I would tend to say, like, if you're wanting to play a disability that you don't have yourself, talk to someone who does have it and kind of understand their perspective. There will almost certainly be like weird corners to the disability that you haven't thought about, both in terms of cool things like wheelchair users, if you're on a flat surface, you are silent as fuck. Like, if you don't want people to hear you, they are not going to hear you. And that's something that could be kind of built into your stats, maybe. But yeah, I think that would be my first piece of advice to people.
That's cool.
I definitely agree with all the points there, and also there's some I'd always say whenever you're playing someone with a disability that like you don't have, try to avoid like the negatives, or like try to not harp on the negatives, and especially don't play the character as like pitiful or like distraught all the time over the fact that they have a disability. And I kind of touched on this a little bit when I did hero sheets a few weeks back, but seeing like I'm deaf, so I can kind of elaborate on like that perspective. But if I saw like a deaf person playing a deaf character and they like had moments of like, oh my god, it sucks so much that I'm deaf, like I wish that I could experience like the world in like different ways, I would be like, okay, that's like relatable, because I have those feelings sometimes, and it's kind of like good to see. But if the same character who's saying those things I know is being played by like a hearing person, it becomes like immediately uncomfortable and like more of a mockery. So it's like you can never really understand like those things. So like presenting them all the time and like lauding on like how awful it is, it just feels way too much like a mockery for me to like even feel comfortable with like seeing that kind of representation anymore. It immediately turns it negative.
I'll go next.
Go ahead.
I'll talk about things from a disability and mental health perspective, because that's generally my area. As a DM, if I'm using Madness as a mechanic, I tend to ask players instead, how would you react to this if this happened to you? And then work in mechanicals then. And if you want to use Madness to start off with, like if you're playing a Malkavian or you want to play PTSD, do some research, and not just film research, because that tends to be very over dramatized and tends to just be, look at this person, they're violent because of their mental illness, which is not the truth of it.
Amazing how that trope is in so many places.
The first one that always springs to mind when it comes to like don't look to film for representation of this kind is always DID. I don't think I've ever seen dissociative identity disorder or like a median system or like alters being portrayed like positively in film ever. And even when it does try to be positive, it's always so overhyped, and there's always the underlying of like, oh well, like they could be dangerous, but they're choosing not to be.
Yeah. How about
Split.
you?
Split.
It had some good places and some bad places.
We have an interesting comment in the Twitch chat from Flick Nightshade. Hello, Flick Nightshade. Saying, I think people assuming disabled lives are miserable is a huge issue. Plus, people acting surprised because you're even out of the house or at university. I think people need to be careful about how they explore issues by exploring the assumptions they have first. I think that's kind of sums up what I was saying earlier. About talking to people and doing your research.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think those of us with like invisible disabilities have heard 100 times again the phrase like, "Oh, I didn't even know that you were disabled." It's like, cool. That's not a compliment.
If I had a coin for every time I've been told you don't look autistic, I'd be a millionaire.
Oh yeah.
I love the variation that's like, wow, I'd never have guessed. You're like, true.
We hide it well because we have to, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How about you, Faye? Have you got advice or tips?
Yeah, I was gonna read. I've written down things because I tend to get a little nervous, which is understandable. But yeah, strictly from a white cis queer perspective, your mood may vary. I mean, what you said, like finding people with those lived experiences is awesome. I think this is a great start. And I don't have any personal experience how to go mechanically, but with the Fall in the Madness trope, I think instead of looking at it from like ooh, this is a kooky thing, let's do this, it's more of a, come from a place of respect. Like this madness table is a bunch of actual traumas and mental illnesses that people have, and that needs to be respected first and foremost. And I think if you come from there first, then you can kind of, come from a better place. And yeah, I think Jazz had a great idea of like, how would you respond to that? I think that's a wonderful start.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, I have Mustang art works on like disability stuff related to tabletop RPGs. So I have like a combat wheelchair that I know the mechanics of for D&D 5e. You can like do like a ram attack, run into people. There's gear for like if you're wearing seatbelts and gloves. So there's like different mechanics for that. Then like with break, like going over different terrain. If you're going downhill, you can incorporate going faster or going slower. Brakes can, like for brakes, you can stop your movement totally. But yeah, there's lots of ways you can incorporate mechanics, D&D or tabletop mechanics using wheelchairs in general.
Yeah, that's super awesome. Is that on Mustang's Twitter?
I think I'm not sure if it is. She sent it to me for people to try out. So I'm not sure if it's on for how public it is.
I'm seeing
It
in the
is.
Twitch chat that it is.
Okay.
It is
Yeah.
on Twitter, apparently.
Okay.
Mhm.
I would
That's,
definitely
Mustang
recommend.
Arts
Yeah,
on Twitter.
It is in their pinned tweet thread. It's a link to a Google document that you can get all the mechanics for and look at.
I would definitely, in general, if you're watching this and looking for mechanical resources, Mustang's art is like tip-top place to find like initial links and places to go. They do great work.
Sleepy Spoony has also done some great stuff on the sort of more invisible disability mental illness side.
That's cool. What kind of thing?
I'll see if I can get the link onto
that's
Twitch
cool.
chat quickly.
No stress. Okay. Well, that's all good tips, I think. I did also want to talk about bad examples. I'm sure a lot of us have horror stories.
Very many.
many horror stories about bad examples of disabilities in games. Personally, I've never had anything like really terrible, but I have seen a lot of dubious portrayals of mental health issues, particularly, as we've said, around trauma, with NPCs. For me, the Curse of Strahd module, which is a D&D 5th edition module for anyone who doesn't know it, it has a heavy kind of horror element and encourages the DM to put layers of madness onto the players as kind of not necessarily penalties, but part of the experience of being in that setting. And I've seen that done badly. Also well. It's not impossible to do it well. But yeah, situations where people have suddenly, like absolutely dramatically changed how their character behaves, which is often not how it works with trauma. Of course it can be. Experiences differ, but I don't think it's a realistic portrayal, and it can be pretty frustrating, especially if the trauma that's being reacted to is something you've experienced yourself. That's a good point. One other thing that I would say, if you are thinking about portraying a mental illness in your character, is just be aware that there are almost certainly people around your table who have like either personal experience or secondhand experience of that problem, and they will be uncomfortable if you are not doing it pitch perfectly. So yeah, that's something to be aware of as well.
I saw something. What would you say? What would if you were to a GM if you wanted to play a disabled character? Like, what was something you would talk about with your GM or with the other players if you wanted to play a disabled character?
Ooh, well, I think personally, I would go to the DM or GM first, and kind of sound out the idea, and make sure they understood what I was going for. primarily. And then for me, if it's a game that I'm playing in that isn't something like Adventurers League, which again I should have explained to anyone who doesn't play 5th edition D&D, Adventurers League is a sort of way for people to get into D&D and play at their friendly local gaming store without any kind of prep. So it's very casual. You often end up on tables with people that you don't know. But for me, if I'm in that setting, I honestly probably wouldn't feel safe playing a disabled character. It wouldn't be kind of worth the risk for me. But in a home game, I will have already surrounded myself with people who are going to be sympathetic and friendly about that kind of thing. So talking to the players isn't so much of a thing for me. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
I think something that sort of holds back some GMs who like want to put that representation into their game but like feel, I guess, nervous about it is that I don't think that you always need to have like mechanics for a disability if you don't want to like have the extra rules for it. Because I have deaf characters that I've played, I've had like blind characters that I've played, I have characters with like mobility issues that I've played, and I don't think that I've had like mechanics like in their character sheet for any of them, just because I already play with like a lot of home rules that I've had for like years, and I want to kind of like build up to putting in like more rules like that. But it's pretty much just like it's literally just kind of like you play as normal, and you just have like this extra thing about your character. And if you ever get into a situation where it's like, okay, like because my character has this disability, like it might react a little bit like different to what the mechanics say. Like when like a blind character gets hit with like the blinded effect or something, or if a deaf character goes into like a bubble of silence, we usually step back and look at it and be like, okay, what is this condition supposed to like remove about your character? Like if you go into like a circle of silence, it's supposed to like you can't cast spells with verbal components, and like you can't communicate. And so instead of making it just silence because it doesn't really like hit the same, we would just be like, okay, it takes away like these things from you, but it's like we call it something else, or it's a different sort of barrier, so that like when my deaf character who only communicates in sign language goes into a bubble of silence, like they can't communicate anymore, just like everyone else, so they can't do sign language.
That does make sense, because when you're speaking sign language, you're using the same part of the brain that you use for speech.
Yeah, and to be honest, with all of this kind of thing, I'm always like, also magic.
Magic.
Once we're in a world with magic, you can kind of hand wave all of that kind of stuff because it's magic.
Yeah, I've never had any qualms with like, oh, how are you signing if you're holding like a sword and shield, or if you're holding your arcane focus? Like it's whatever. It's a fantasy game. We're gonna have fun.
Yeah. If we're allowing dragons, then we can allow sign language. Like, come on, people. How about you, Faye?
Yeah, for me, my bad examples stem from trauma, so it's more like, goodness. Let's see. Characters are put into situations that, I didn't really agree with, or that were traumatic, or, people don't think like, oh, I'm just gonna use assault as a, as a story hook.
Character
and it's like,
development.
Yeah, no, I couldn't. Or sometimes my character, who is obviously also a woman, were rescued by the cis male players, and I'm the damsel in distress, and it's like, yeah, I don't need that. I came here to be, a player myself, and to have power as myself, and I don't need that. So those were my bad examples.
Yeah, I guess. Sorry, Mike. Did you have any like great bad examples?
Sorry, I did think of a bad example.
Oh yeah, go for it, Jazz.
I used to play with someone who I like to say had all of his characters with narcissistic personality disorder. They at some point decided they were going to misgender my character on purpose.
No.
Oh no.
And I'm pretty sure they tried to use their autism as an excuse for this, which was not ideal.
You all should see the Twitch chat reacting to that.
Yeah.
Displeased.
To put it lightly.
Nobody
Yeah.
likes that.
No. Very not okay. Very, very not okay. Mm-mm.
Sam is in the Twitch chat saying, "Whose shoes am I emptying my ostomy bag into?"
If you want to go
That's-
to Telford, I think you'll find him pretty easily.
Yeah, that's terrible, Jazz. Yeah, wow. Have you had any bad examples, Mike, or have you only had good? That would be nice.
Yeah.
I haven't been a part of any really bad examples that I can really think of. The only ones that I can think of are ones I've heard about, like through Twitter.
Good.
So I haven't-
It's so awesome. It really is.
In my home game that I used to play on Saturday, before we all had to stay in our house all the time, one of my players, bless his heart, he tries for the most part, but there's still like there's just the social ingraining of you make fun of it. His character got feeble mind cast on him, and like I don't know how to describe, because it's not something that I want to mimic. I don't know how to describe other than he did the very stereotypical kind of like seal noise kind of thing. Yeah, for like while he was feeble mind, and it was very bad all around, and I had to like shut it down like the middle of the game and stand up and be like, I don't mean to be calling you out right now, but like that's not acceptable in this household. I was like, three of the 7 people at this table are autistic, like you please think about. And he felt super bad about it and was like apologizing and stuff, but it was a very strong reaction, like in the moment of this is probably the most unacceptable thing that like I've seen at my table. Yeah, it's not even something that I like thinking about.
I don't know. I mean, this is probably a good time to talk about like X cards and that kind of mechanic. I don't know how many of you have played with those before, but it's an idea where, as well as talking before a game, which I think you should always do about what is and is not acceptable to include in the game, players can also have probably literally a piece of paper with just an X on it in front of them during the game. And if something is happening that is not acceptable to them, they can just show it. And the DM takes that as a cue to like immediately move the session on to something different. And that I think is very good and should be more widely adopted, because it is very hard in the middle of a session to call a stop to something or to call someone out. It can feel really uncomfortable. And having that kind of pre-agreed, like, we're not going to ask you why, we're not going to be like, oh, but can't we just finish this bit of roleplay or whatever, is really great. Also, I see Reese, hello Reese, in the Twitch chat talking about lines and veils.
Yes.
Are we all familiar with that?
No, I've not heard of it before.
I'm in a Curse of Strahd game where we're using lines and veils. Lions are things you for sure you do not want in a game, and veils are things where you can be like cut to black situation, or
that makes sense then. I've just not heard it called that.
Yeah.
Or it's not described as vividly or something like that.
Yeah.
Some people also use the stoplight method too, where it's red, green, and yellow. And red is you don't cover it at all. Yellow you can kind of, yellow is a veil, and green it's like no problems, go right ahead.
Yeah. Fun thing.
Yeah, Faye, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Safety tools are definitely very important, and especially session 0, I think, is definitely, like I said, a good start in a way to kind of minimize the harm that you might cause. But there's like all kinds of safety tools that people have put out there, and it still also comes back to respect, because I've also seen threads of people say, well, I had safety tools and things still happen. So
yeah.
It still comes down to you need to come to the table with that respect. So
totally. Also, for
Yeah.
anyone who hasn't used the term before, a session 0 is like a pre-game session where you like talk to players about their characters and about things like lines and veils and safety tools. There's a lot of links being dropped into the Twitch chat, by the way, which is awesome. Thank you, everyone who's dropping resources.
Yay! So good.
With the X cards, there is also kind of a thing that needs to be said where if sometimes you're going as a DM, if you're kind of describing like what might be like a traumatizing scene, sometimes people will get too uncomfortable to use their X cards. That can totally happen. Either if it's like you can emphasize to them like 100 times, like use your X card, like it's okay, like we're not going to be upset about it or judge you, but in the moment, like they still might not use it. It is, I think, kind of one of your responsibilities as a DM and also sort of like the other players at the table. If you know that like you are playing with someone who might like, have a trauma reaction that doesn't allow them to, be comfortable enough to use their X card, take their like facial expressions into account. If you're going through like a traumatic scene, like you can stop in the middle of it and be like, is everyone okay? Like, can we continue? Is this all right? If you know that it's going to happen at some point during the game, maybe do like a little disclaimer at the beginning of it. At Mousecapades, plague is a very heavy topic, which wasn't meant to be so topical, but it turned out that way. So I have to do disclaimers at the beginning, like not only for the players, but also like for the audience. Whenever I play with Mustang's art, because they're very good at like gothic horror and stuff like that, they always put disclaimers like, hey, like your character might go through something very harrowing. Like if you need to stop, just let me know, like prepare yourself, get in like the mental space for it. And so I think it's very important not just having like a safety tool in an X card, but also having a space for like acknowledging that sometimes those safety tools might fail anyways, and be prepared to sort of like take care of like your fellow players before or like after the game if like it's hard for them to kind of like come down from it.
Totally. And I think also it's worth saying, like, if something does go wrong in a game and, someone doesn't feel able to use an X card, or you haven't thought about using X cards and that kind of mechanic, it doesn't make you like a terrible person. You just need to learn from it and communicate with the person who's been affected. Like, I wouldn't be saying like, oh, you made a mistake, so I'm never going to play with you again. Although equally, if that was someone's reaction, that would also be valid. But I think, like, as we're all saying, and this is happening as well in the Twitch chat, communication is the key. I personally recently had a situation where my DM was trying to do like a flashback scene for my character, and it was supposed to be a surprise to me, like an uncovered memory. So there hadn't been like pre-warning about what it was going to be, which already possibly was a mistake. But it turned out to be something that was traumatic for me. They weren't aware of that. It wasn't their fault. But we hadn't at that point introduced like an X card system into our game. So there was no way for me in the moment to be like, I need you to stop this now. And it was okay, like the session continued and I wasn't too badly affected, but we did then afterwards, I messaged them and was like, hey, that wasn't good for me. And we had a talk about it and kind of came up with a way to kind of retcon it in the game and change it. And that was really helpful. So I think like, even if things do go wrong, there are ways to move past it and fix it.
Not all of your players will have lines and veils either. My home game, we don't have a line and a veil system, just because when I talked to them about it during the session 0, I was like, is there anything that I should look out for? And they were like, nope, all good. And I was like, all right. Like sometimes it's like that. Sometimes, I have for all the games that I DM, I have like lists of all like the lines and veils that I have to be aware of. Some of those lists are very long, some of those lists are completely empty. It comes and goes, and that's why you kind of have to like check over, because everyone is different.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great saying in the Twitch chat from Tyler Moonsage. Hello. Communication is lubrication. In all areas of life, I agree.
No? Okay.
That's a great phrase. Okay, well, we've kind of talked about this a bit already, but and there are some great links being dropped in the Twitch chat, and I've seen that Heroes have said they're going to retweet a lot of these links. So if you are missing them or don't want to scroll up or whatever, I think they will be tweeted, which is awesome. But are people aware of any resources to point people to online, or like sites to do research on, that kind of thing?
There's that safety tools like handbook that has a list of a bunch of different safety tools for people to use. I've seen that before, but I don't have the link to it right now. Right now, but I can look for it.
That's cool.
I think we have gone over quite a few like resources with less things are in the I believe that their name starts with a K, and it was dropped in Twitch chat for the tabletop RPG like safety tools. Sleepy Spoonies references as well are pretty good, especially for like like Jazz was saying, for kind of like the more
popped that link in.
thing.
I think it's
awesome.
buried now
Thanks, Jazz.
somewhere.
People can scroll, it's fine. That's cool.
There's a great book as well on DN's Guild. It's Pay What You Want. I don't have a link to it though. It covers prosthetics, service animals, blindness, deafness. And what I like is sign language, but not as a way to get around the silence spell or to cast stealthily. Because that's not what sign language is for, and that's not why you should use it as a character.
Always just another form of communication in my games, and it's always treated like on par with speaking. Pretty much. And I think if there's anything like mechanically that I would want to put in, it would be to have like in your languages you know put if you know sign or not, because some characters like they might not, and then some characters they might, and I like treating it the same as like, you know, you come across like two orcs making plans. Any of you speak Orcish? Nope, you don't know what they're saying. All right, move along.
Yeah. We have a cool comment from Nova in the Twitch chat saying that speaking of safety tools and good examples, the 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade rulebook has a whole section dedicated to safety tools and multiple pages of sources to do further reading. That's really cool.
Not know about.
That is.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's cool because
Great.
it's
Good.
nice hearing something good about Vampire the Masquerade, because I've
Yeah,
always
they've
heard
made a
bad
lot of
things
mistakes.
when it comes to mental and when it comes to mental things in Vampire the Masquerade.
That's one of the systems you play, right, Faye?
Yeah, I played it a long time ago, live action. I was just kind of thrust into it. They're like, nope, you can't watch. You have to play a character. I was like, okay, great, thanks. I mean, it was fun. It was still fun, but yeah, lots of dominating in minds and stuff. And now I'm even there's a discussion even happening on Twitter recently that I won't get into, but apparently people are like, well, maybe I was wrong to implement that in my games, and now I'm even thinking like, ooh, she wouldn't even have that. Because that can delve into some DM taking control of a part of you is kind of a personal thing. So yeah.
I rule it the same way as persuasion on characters. It's harder to dominate a player character than it is to dominate an NPC.
Fair enough.
By the way, if you are watching this and you have any questions for us, please do just drop them into the Twitch chat. I'm watching it, so I'll see them. We did have one question submitted to us before the game. We had a submit form in the Chromatic Chimera Discord channel, so I'll read it out. The question is from @Bushi_Adams. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, on Twitter. And they said, while describing physical ailments comes akin to storytelling for a DM or a player, because it can be tied into the visuals that others would see, describing a character with neuroatypical characteristics isn't as easy to describe. Invisible illnesses are difficult enough for us to know about face to face. How can we go about describing a character who is neuroatypical without being really stereotypical or flat out offensive. This is something I struggle with because I love inclusion, but I always want to do it justice. So I think this is a question about how to introduce a character who is neuroatypical, and where you would with a physical disability say, oh, and they have a prosthetic arm or they are using a wheelchair. It's harder to describe neuroatypical characteristics like that. Anyone have thoughts?
I've been talking first this whole time. I wanna.
Yeah.
What else?
Hey, or Jazz, you were saying some stuff about this before.
I can take it if you want. I don't want to dominate the chat too much.
Fine, go for it.
As long as you don't portray like a lisp, it is on Big Bang Theory, for example. If you say they speak with a lisp and describe what words they stumble over, but don't actually do it unless you have it yourself, the same way as being autistic. You can describe them stimming by rubbing their fingers over and over again. By actually doing that rather than describing it.
Yeah, I think this is something we were talking about before, how like the best way might be to just show the behaviors or characteristics that you want that character to have. And then if the PCs want to draw their own conclusions, they can. Does that make sense?
If you're in a group that's a little bit less like theater of the mind, then it might be appropriate to like put into your game when you introduce an NPC, like this is so and so, like they have autism, or you can go through describing, like if they stem, or if they have like rituals that they do, or if they have like a special interest, or anything of that nature, and sometimes, because I've had a couple of NPCs that I've introduced that have more sort of like invisible disabilities or like neurodivergencies, and sometimes it just never comes to light, and I think that's okay as well. I have plenty of friends like nowadays who have known me for years and they still don't know that like I'm hard of hearing, or they still don't know that I'm autistic, just because like socially, of course, it's I'm trained to hide it first and foremost. And even with the people that I'm comfortable around, it's become such second nature to hide it that like I'm very used to people not knowing, and it's not like personally a problem for me if no one ever finds out. And so when I introduce my NPC, then I think like, oh, okay, this one is going to have a neurodivergency, and my players just never know. I don't see it as that big of a problem, because sometimes it isn't.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, for me, my mobility difficulties they only affect me over time. So I very, very frequently have co-workers who just never know, because around an office, like walking between my desk and the bathroom or whatever, you're not going to notice that there's anything different about how I'm moving. And then occasionally I have to like out myself because we have a work outing or something where I have to be like, actually, like an assault course is not fun for me. And people are always like, wow, I would never have guessed. Like, that's the problem.
And sometimes it also will affect everyone differently. So sometimes the signs are different. Like I have EDS. Sarah Mustang's has EDS, which like they're very open about. We both go about our lives very differently, and we handle it very differently. And my EDS was something that like I knew there was something wrong with my body for like a very, very long time, but it literally wasn't until like January of this year that I was diagnosed, because I had an accident where I fell down the stairs and I hurt my ribs very badly, and I was going through like a lot of physical therapy, and near the end of it, like the doctor who was taking care of me kind of sat me down, and he was like, do you know what this is? Have you ever heard of this before? And I was like, no. And I heard of it, but I didn't like apply it to myself. And he was like, I think we don't have any specialists in my town, so like I couldn't get help for it immediately. But like knowing what it was helped a whole lot. and also like if sometimes like you can have an NPC who doesn't know that they're disabled, or like knows like maybe something is wrong but they don't have like a name for it. Sometimes I find the struggle of like if you're running in like a fantasy sort of medieval campaign and you want to be very, very high fantasy, sometimes it's weird to put in like the super scientific kind of sounding words. Like
Yeah, totally.
Mm-hmm.
So we only have 10 minutes left. So I know time flies. So I wanted us to just touch on one other area of disabilities in RPGs, which is access at the RPG table. So out of character access issues. Any like good or bad practice that you've seen yourselves? I know obviously we've talked about X cards and safety tools a lot. But anything else? Like, for example, I really liked when I started Mascapades, everyone was asked what adjustments could be made to make the game easier for them, like taking breaks, for example, at specific intervals, or anything else that might help people. I don't know if anyone else has like good practice that they've seen.
I guess I could go. One thing I think that would help me personally, or anybody else who might have kind of like stage fright sometimes, is just kind of check in with the person if they their character is on the spotlight and they're just kind of sitting there nervous, but their character might have a higher charisma or something. And it's like, okay, well, this person's probably struggling. Maybe try to explain, like, as a GM, this is what I would like to have happen, and kind of do it more out of game instead of being like, okay, but you have to role play right now. Because sometimes like you just can't. You're just like, everyone's looking at me.
I've seen an interesting comment coming off the back of that, Faye, from Flick Nightshade, saying they use WhatsApp to message while playing to check in. So there's no need to kind of break the flow of a game, but they have that other way of communicating. That's cool.
So awesome. I love it.
Yeah, I like that idea.
I've got one as well. If you are hosting in person, if you've got someone in a wheelchair, make sure that the way from the lift, for example, the doors are unlocked.
Have basic access standards, please. Yes.
I like them.
Sorry, we're having some issues with our web captioning.
Oh no!
But hopefully we'll get that back up. Mike, have you seen anything particularly good or like bad things that people should do?
I really like how more streams are using web captioner, which we're using right now. I really like that as a tool more for online streams and games in general.
Yeah, I think the link has just been dropped into the Twitch chat, but it's a very simple like online tool. You don't need anything fancy to do it, as far as I can tell.
Says it's still listening, so I'm not sure why they're not coming through.
Interesting.
Apologies for the lack of captions. We'll try and fix that. Oh, apparently they are coming through. Just stay close to your mic. So there we go.
I've moved it as much as I can.
Interesting. Okay, there it goes. Apparently I was too quiet. Apologies.
I've with the captions, I've actually gotten to the point now where they've become so like commonplace that if someone doesn't have captions on whatever piece of like media it is, I literally won't watch it if it doesn't have captions on it. I was like, it needs to be so commonplace at this point that it's kind of like unacceptable in some aspects. Someone in the Tyler Moon Sage in the chat, if you're hosting an in-person game, talk about lighting and sound pollution. That is also very, very good to talk about. I don't have a whole lot of like visual problems, so like lighting pollution isn't something that I've actually thought about, so I'm glad that it was like brought up. But sound pollution is something, especially when you're streaming, that kind of should be talked about. Like we had a mention before this even that was like try to not talk over each other, and it's always harder to do online rather than like in person. And sometimes it also comes with like music. Some people put sound effects or background music into their streams, and for some people it works. And for some people, like me, if it's too loud and I can't hear the players' voices and enjoy like what's going on, then it's not going to work. Even with your meeting place, if you're going to be meeting in like your local game store, like sometimes just what's going on in like the other room is going to be too distracting for your players.
My local gaming store, in general for Adventurers League, is really, really busy. So we have like 100 players in a room that is not big enough for 100 players. And however, so that's like an upstairs room. But for people who do have problems with auditory processing, there is 2 or 3 tables set aside downstairs as well, which is a lot quieter. And people can request to use those, which, I mean, it's not ideal because there will probably be more people who would like to use those tables than there are tables, but it's the kind of first step. And just with the lack of space, it's something that we can't really avoid. Yeah, a lot of conversation in the Twitch chat about ways to mitigate that. That's really good.
So awesome, y'all.
Shout out from France.
Sorry?
Oh, I did.
Oklahoma_Joes is giving you a shout out from France.
Oh. Hi, everybody.
Hello from around the world.
Okay, well, we are probably due to wrap up about now. So thank you all for being here. I'll just let us all go back around and recap who we are and where you can find us. I'd also say that all of CouchCon is going on all this weekend on the Heroes channel and on Chromatic Chimera, and another channel that I can't remember. I'm really sorry.
Wandering DM, I think it is.
Wandering DM. Thank you, Jazz. Legend. There is in fact a mini painting panel going on right now on Chromatic Chimera, so drop over there if you want to see that. And we are raising money for Doctors Without Borders USA. So if you'd like to make a donation, please do that. I think we're at around $900 so far for the weekend, which is amazing. So let's try and kind of push that up to the 1,000. That would be awesome. Okay, so I've been Miranda Debenham. You can find me on Twitter at mdebenham1. I'm normally talking about D&D or theatre, or just kind of generally snarking at the world. So feel free to tune into that if you want to. And you can also find me playing Mousecapades on alternate Fridays on the Heroes Without Limits channel. Jazz?
So you can find me at Twitter at @FortureJazz. And I post cosplays, character art, what D&D games I've been in that have been fun. And
awesome.
That's pretty much me.
Hey?
I am Faye. You can find me on Twitter at FayeInTwilight, and you can find me on Twitch on the same name, and I like to talk about social justice issues and geeky stuff and what's happening in my life, and thank you to my friends and family who came to watch me.
Mike?
Yeah, Mike. You can find me at Silent Chariot on Twitch and Twitter. Usually streaming on Thread Raiders. And on Saturdays you can find me at Mustang Arts on Twitch in a Curse of Strahd campaign.
Awesome. Joe?
I'm Joe. I go by they, them pronouns. You can find me at Sleepless More with only 2 S's in the middle on Twitter. The cat in charge. Anywhere else, including TikTok, which I became more obsessed with than I thought that I was ever going to. I do a lot of theater. I do a lot of cosplay. I mostly do writing. I have writing commissions open right now, so hit me up, please. I think that's everything for me. I do Mousecapades with Miranda, alternating Fridays. Our 4th episode, we're halfway through the mini-series, is going to be on April 17th. So come and join us there.
And finally, I'd like to shout out Samwise Gamgee, who has been doing all of our tech for this stream and has also been in the Twitch chat. Thank you so much. You've been awesome. That's been us. Please stick around for more CouchCon content on this channel and the other channels we mentioned, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
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 We're raiding Chromatic Chimera. Go raid Chromatic Chimera.
Yeah.
Yes, do
Find
that.
the raid.
Go, go.
Bye, everyone. Good night.